14 years after his best friend destroyed his reputation, Peter Vale received a key in the mail. There was no return address, only a small brass key taped inside an envelope, and a card bearing the name of a funeral home 3 states away. Malik Renshaw had died 6 days earlier. Peter had known he was sick, although not from Malik. People from Blackglass occasionally sent messages Peter never answered, usually some variation of the same uncomfortable sentence. You should probably know. Peter had spent 14 years building a life in which Malik Renshaw no longer mattered. He repaired climbing equipment in a shop near Portland, taught occasional wilderness classes, and avoided mountains high enough to carry snow through summer. He had never married. He rarely spoke about Blackglass. When customers noticed the old mountain rescue emblem tattooed beneath his wrist, he told them it belonged to another life. The key changed that. Peter recognized it immediately. When he and Malik were 23, they had found an abandoned fire lookout above Blackglass Ridge. The Forest Service had stopped using it decades earlier, but the tower remained. 4 glass walls, a rusted roof, a wood stove that smoked whenever the wind turned west, and a view stretching across nearly 40 miles of mountains. Malik had found the spare key beneath a loose floorboard. They were young enough to consider that permission. For almost 20 years, the lookout became theirs. They climbed there after bad relationships, difficult rescues, birthdays, funerals, and nights when neither wanted to go home. They repaired the windows themselves. Malik hauled an old green chair up the mountain piece by piece. Peter rebuilt the stove. They left coffee in metal tins, blankets in a wooden trunk, and a battered deck of cards that somehow survived every winter. They had also made the decision that eventually ruined them there. Peter and Malik met as teenagers because each had independently decided that a closed trail sign was more of a suggestion than a rule. They were caught in the same thunderstorm, sheltered beneath the same rock overhang, and spent 3 hours arguing about which of them had made the stupider decision. By college, they were climbing partners. By 30, they had helped establish Blackglass Mountain Rescue, a volunteer organization serving a region too remote to justify a permanent professional team. Malik was stronger. Peter was more cautious. Together, that worked. Malik could carry an injured climber through terrain that exhausted everyone else. Peter could look at a sky that seemed perfectly clear and decide they needed to turn around because the pressure had changed or the wind sounded wrong against the ridge. People joked that Malik rescued hikers and Peter rescued Malik. For 11 years, nobody died on one of their missions. Then came January 17th. The call arrived shortly before sunset. 3 climbers had failed to return from a winter route across Blackglass Ridge. Temperatures were falling, snow had begun moving across the upper mountain, and a front expected after midnight was arriving several hours early. Peter was team lead that evening. Malik was already at the station when dispatch gave them the names. One of the missing climbers was Malik's younger brother, Devon. Peter remembered the silence afterward more clearly than anything else. Malik did not panic. He simply stared at the map while everyone around him became very careful about where they looked. They left within 20 minutes. For the first 2 hours, conditions were difficult but manageable. Headlamps moved through dense pine forest beneath a ceiling of blowing snow. The team found footprints near the old mining road and followed them upward. Near midnight, the tracks disappeared beneath fresh accumulation. Wind began crossing the ridge hard enough to stagger people carrying rescue packs. Peter stopped the team beneath a rock face known locally as the Gate. Above it lay the exposed traverse. He checked the barometer twice. Then he radioed dispatch. They were turning back. Malik said no. At first, Peter thought he had misunderstood him through the wind. Malik stepped closer and said it again. Devon was somewhere above them. They had already come too far to retreat. Peter told him the slope was loading with snow. Malik said his brother would freeze before morning. Peter reminded him that 6 other rescuers were standing behind them. Malik looked up toward the ridge and answered, "Then they can go back." He started climbing. Peter ordered him to stop. Malik continued, "There are decisions people imagine they would make cleanly until the moment actually arrives." Peter could have allowed Malik to continue alone. That was what procedure required. Instead, he swore, transferred team command to his deputy, and went after his friend. The remaining rescuers followed Peter. They found Devon and another climber 35 minutes later huddled beneath a shallow ledge. The third man had fallen earlier and was already dead. Devon could barely stand, but he was alive. For perhaps 5 minutes, it seemed Malik had been right. Then the mountain moved. The avalanche began somewhere above them with a sound Peter later described as fabric tearing across the entire sky. Snow hit the traverse in a wall. Peter was thrown downhill and buried to his shoulders. 2 rescuers were carried into trees. Malik disappeared completely. When the snow stopped, Devon was gone. They found his body the following afternoon. Everyone else survived. That should have been the tragedy. Instead, it became the beginning of something worse. The official investigation started within days. Blackglass Mountain Rescue had operated under a county agreement dependent on strict command procedures. Someone had ignored an obvious avalanche warning. Someone had ordered volunteers onto an exposed slope after conditions exceeded their operating limits. Peter expected criticism. He had followed Malik rather than forcing the team to retreat, and he knew that decision was his. What he did not expect was Malik's statement. Malik told investigators that Peter had ordered the team upward. He said he had argued for retreat. 3 other rescuers remembered confusion in the storm, but had been too far away to hear the original exchange clearly. Dispatch recordings should have settled the question, except several minutes of radio traffic from the gate were missing because the mountain repeater had failed during the storm. Peter thought Malik would correct himself the next morning. Then, the next week. He never did. The county suspended Peter from rescue operations. His professional guiding insurer dropped him. An outdoor magazine that had once profiled the 2 friends published a follow-up describing the reckless command decision at Blackglass Ridge. Devon's family refused to speak to Peter. People who had trusted him with their lives began looking away when they saw him in town. Malik remained with the rescue service. Peter confronted him once. They met at the fire lookout 3 months after the avalanche. Snow still covered the northern slope. Peter demanded to know why Malik had lied. Malik said only, "If I tell them what happened, Blackglass Rescue disappears." Peter asked him what that had to do with destroying his life. Malik looked through the western window for a long time. Then he said, "I'm sorry." Peter hit him. It was the last conversation they had. Peter left Blackglass before summer. The rescue service survived. Over the next 14 years, Peter occasionally heard what happened there despite his efforts not to. Blackglass Mountain Rescue expanded. The county bought them 2 new vehicles. Volunteers trained with professional avalanche teams. Malik became operations director. Newspapers photographed him after difficult rescues. A state wilderness association gave him an award. Peter learned to stop clicking the links people sent. Then Malik died. 3 weeks after receiving the key, Peter drove back to Blackglass. The town looked smaller than he remembered. The old diner had become a pharmacy. The climbing shop was now a real estate office. But the mountains had not changed. Blackglass Ridge still rose beyond the roofs, like a broken wall, its upper slopes white, even though the valley was green. Peter parked at the old trailhead shortly after dawn. The hike to the lookout took 4 hours. For most of it, he saw no one. The forest slowly gave way to alpine grass, broken granite, and wind-bent trees. Above the timberline, the tower appeared exactly where memory had kept it, a dark square perched against an enormous sky. The brass key opened the door. Inside, almost nothing had changed. The green chair was still beside the western window. Their deck of cards remained inside a rusted coffee tin. Someone had replaced the stovepipe. On the wall hung a photograph of Peter and Malik at 26, standing on the summit after their first winter rescue. Beneath the photograph sat a metal ammunition box. Peter opened it. Inside were 3 cassette tapes, an old handheld recorder, a bundle of unopened letters, and the original radio unit Malik had been carrying on January 17th. Peter sat in the green chair for nearly an hour before touching anything. Then he played the first tape. Wind filled the tiny speaker. His own younger voice followed. Blackglass team to dispatch. Conditions deteriorating. We are turning around at the gate. Static. Then Malik. My brother is above us. Peter's voice again. I know. You want me to leave him there? I'm not taking 7 people onto that slope. More wind. Then Malik, farther from the radio. Then don't. Peter heard himself shout Malik's name. Several seconds later came the sentence that ended 14 years of uncertainty. Transfer command to Ellis. I'm going after him. The recording continued. Peter sat perfectly still. Malik had kept everything. The second tape had been recorded only months before his death. Malik's voice was older now. He explained what Peter had already begun to understand. After the avalanche, county officials had warned that if a rescue member had knowingly violated a direct command and pulled the team into avalanche terrain for personal reasons, Blackglass Mountain Rescue could lose its operating agreement. Their insurance carrier had already threatened withdrawal. The organization owned almost nothing. One lawsuit could end it. Malik had panicked. He told the first investigator that Peter had ordered the ascent. Then he told the second. By the time he understood what he had done, the lie had become the official version. Malik said he convinced himself Peter would survive it. Peter was the better guide. Peter could leave town. Peter could rebuild somewhere else. Blackglass Rescue could not. I turned you into a number, Malik said on the recording. One career against an organization. One friendship against however many people we might save. I told myself that made it a decision instead of what it was. There was a long silence. It was cowardice. Peter stopped the tape. Outside, afternoon clouds moved slowly across the ridge. He opened the wooden trunk beneath the window. Inside were dozens of small fabric patches bearing dates and coordinates. Rescue markers. Every time the Blackglass team brought someone home alive, Malik had apparently added one. Peter counted 68 before he stopped. The mathematics Malik had used to justify the betrayal was sitting in front of him. 68 people. Maybe more. Children lost on trails. Climbers with broken legs. Hunters caught in storms. Drivers who went over mountain roads. People whose families received phone calls saying they were coming home because Blackglass Mountain Rescue still existed. Peter hated Malik for making the argument so difficult. That evening, he walked halfway toward the ridge. The sun disappeared behind Blackglass, turning the snowfields gold and then gray. Far below, the town lights appeared one by one. Somewhere near the highway, the rescue station's red antenna blinked against the dark. Peter had imagined this moment for 14 years without knowing it. Proof, vindication, something undeniable that could force everyone who had doubted him to admit they had been wrong. Now he had it, and using it would not undo anything. The following morning, Peter carried the metal box down the mountain. He went directly to the rescue station. A young volunteer opened the door. She recognized his name before she recognized his face. Inside, the building was larger than the station Peter remembered. Maps covered one wall. Rescue helmets dried beside the equipment room. Framed photographs documented years of missions Peter had never been part of. At the center hung a photograph of Malik. Beneath it were the words, "He brought them home." Peter stood beneath the photograph for a long time. Then he asked for the operations chief. The county reopened the Blackglass investigation 9 days later. Peter released the recording. He also released Malik's final tape. People wanted him to simplify what had happened. Reporters asked whether Malik Renshaw had been a hero or a fraud. Former volunteers asked whether every award bearing his name should be removed. Devon's surviving sister called Peter and apologized for 14 years of silence. Peter gave the same answer every time. Malik had saved people. Malik had lied. Neither truth erased the other. The county formally cleared Peter of ordering the ascent. Blackglass Mountain Rescue kept its operating agreement because the organization that existed now was not the organization that had failed 14 years earlier. Malik's photograph was removed from the center of the station, but it was not destroyed. It was moved to a smaller hallway containing the history of the service, beside photographs of Devon and the other climber who died on the ridge. Peter was offered his old rescue certification back. He declined. Instead, the following winter, he returned to the fire lookout. The tower had officially been condemned, so Peter and several volunteers repaired it with Forest Service permission. They replaced the roof, strengthened the stairs, and installed a weather station where the old wood stove had once smoked. Blackglass Rescue began using the tower to monitor storms approaching the ridge. Peter kept the green chair. On the first clear evening after the work was finished, he sat there alone and watched the shadow of Blackglass Ridge stretch across the valley. He still did not forgive Malik. Perhaps he never would. But forgiveness, Peter finally understood, was not the price of accepting the truth. Malik had betrayed him. Malik had loved him. Malik had been frightened. Malik had saved lives. Human beings were capable of carrying all of those things at once. Outside, snow began falling lightly over the mountain. Peter watched it settle across the ridge that had divided their lives. Then he switched on the weather radio and stayed.